Well, hey there, folks. I just want to let you know before we begin today's story, the author IsaiahItAintSo wrote two other stories, and they all go together. The first one was Letting James Leave Neverland, and the second, If and the Queen of Monsters. And then, of course, this one. I suggest you listen to them in that order, but whatever order you listen to them in, they will still make complete sense. The links to the other stories are down below in the comments. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and, well, let's start. I started my trip to Mississippi sitting cross-legged on the floor at LaGuardia. It was late November and the terminal was bustling. I sat with my back to the wall, stealing some electricity to charge my old phone. My ghostly assistant, If, perched on my shoulder. Weightless and silent, she watched the crowds move. Her blank, empty eyes peered out from behind gossamer strands of her white hair. You can never be too careful in these big airports. So I had one hand resting, palm up on my knee, waiting, feeling just in case. Suddenly a bright, loud, happy peal of laughter rang out, and If snapped up. Together we watched the trio of women in beautiful, colorful sarahs swish by, animated and preoccupied. They made me smile. I've always loved sarahs, but so far, Father Scott's never sent me anywhere out east. Another time, maybe. I can take the monsters in India, right? I was headed out on a side job to somewhere a little ways outside of Jackson, Mississippi. Some hot-headed realtor had a property he couldn't sell, took a bet that was costing him money, and hired me to see if I could clean the house. Jackson's not too far from home, so I squeezed the job in, figuring I'd be back to New Orleans by Christmas. Our boarding call was announced. I unplugged, nodded my goodbye to If, and hefted my bag onto the shoulder she vacated. I have no idea how she gets around. I don't usually ask. I just know she doesn't like airplanes, and she'll be wherever I'm going. She floated lightly over a chair, her tattered sleeves fluttering, and she was gone. The job itself was pretty straightforward on paper. Someone died and wouldn't leave. They do that sometimes, usually the ones who die mad. But we've been over this, right? The souls aren't meant to be without bodies. They're not supposed to stay here after their time's up. The longer they do, the worse they feel. Anger, sadness, and longing take over, polluting and damaging the soul. Eventually, someone like me comes in to deal with the result. As I went over my notes, I started to think I might not like my client. I try not to develop prejudices because this is a strange business. People don't like having to hire me at all. I know this isn't like pulling up a web page and bringing in a roofer. There aren't review sites for people in this line of work, and I'm not on Angie's list. I get that this is abnormal, but people sometimes treat you badly, even if they need you, and you can usually tell by the emails if the job's going to come with a side of snark. I sighed as the plane touched down in Jackson and hoped I'd be wrong. I was right. He held up a sign with my name on it. His expression twisted into an unpleasant sneer as I approached. "Allentan?" I asked, extending a gloved hand. An enormous, toothy, phony smile erupted across his face, stopping short of his eyes. I felt If's presence on my shoulder a second before he shook my hand hard. "Welcome to Mississippi, Miss Wren. Allentan. It's a real pleasure to meet you." He pumped my hand vigorously up and down like he'd just sold me a car. That inane smile screwed into his cheeks. I was glad I kept the gloves on. I can forgive a schmarmy dude. Some people are just like that. But then he greeted the empty air beside me with a low, sweeping bow. "This must be your assistant spirit," he said, in a tone just patronizing enough to let me know he didn't think anyone was there. I mean, to be fair, she wasn't there. If leapt from my shoulder and rested herself on his back. She weighed him down, making herself heavier and heavier until he sagged forward onto his hands and couldn't straighten back up. "What in the hell?" he exclaimed. Trying to keep his balance, he sputtered and stumbled as she pressed him down, and when he hit his knees, she looked up at me. I shrugged. If's not evil, but she's not an entirely benign being. I do not control her. I don't even know where she came from. She's been with me since I was a kid, and her appearance never changes. I can describe her with my eyes closed because I can still see her then. There's no color to If. She's all black and white, and she might not even be a living person. She has no eyes, no hands, and no feet. Her sleeves and pant legs flutter, empty in a wind only she can feel. Her teeth all end in small, sharp points, and her eye sockets are empty black hollows. She has pin-straight white hair, and depending upon her mood, it's either flowing down her back or blowing wildly like it carries an electric charge around her face. She's mentioned by name in my contracts because I talk to her out loud, and there's a sketch of her so people can have an idea of what we're dealing with. She does what she wants, and if she'd wanted him to, he'd have been able to see her. He kinda just decided to be rude. I nodded, a tiny jerk of movement, and with a wide grin she stepped lightly off the realtor's back. Freed and embarrassed, he threw his hair back and brushed his hands down the front of his suit while he composed himself. With a strained, tight-lipped smile, he suggested we head out, and I followed. This guy's car suggested to me that he wasn't as successful a realtor as he claimed, and as we bounced down the road, I went through the file he gave me. The story was, there were 3 fallen trees behind a charming old house out in the country, and a ghost haunting them wouldn't allow anyone to do anything with the property. The trees couldn't be touched. Any attempt to cut or move resulted in equipment breaking and people getting hurt. "How long have the trees been lying there?" I asked after a while, wondering if it would be rude to try to adjust his heater, if there even was a heater. "Since the 80s, he replied. "Jeannie Taylor died in the winter of 1985. Stephen kept the house for another few years after he married Michelle, but when Jeannie came back, he sold the house and never looked back. About a month or 2 later, the trees just fell down dead. Now they're out there ruining the view from that deck, and nobody can do anything with them. It ruins the whole house, her being out there, and she doesn't even go in," he complained. I chuckled. "Yeah, and I bet dying really ruined Jeannie's day." "Well, she's had her pound of flesh by now, hasn't she?" Steering with one hand, he reached into the back seat and grabbed a folder. "She's injured or terrorized countless innocent people on the property for over the past 30 years now. I might be the only person in this town who hadn't seen her. I don't take pictures, I'm an agent." He gestured at me with the folder, keeping it clamped tightly in his hand. "I had Marina take those for you last week, but she didn't look at them. The fellow at CVS said she's definitely there. Hold it. Kind of like—" He angled the folder away from himself before he let me take it, and he noticed my smirk. He didn't mention it. I guess he was serious about not looking. I held on to the folder as we pulled into the neighborhood. There were 3 very 80s looking houses at the end of a long road, spaced oddly. The neighborhood had been started and never finished. It was a gorgeous day for such a macabre trip. The sun shone brightly over the skeletons of houses that nobody wanted to stay in, and at first everything felt fine. Janine Elizabeth Montgomery Taylor had spent her first and only year of her marriage in a cheery blue split-level ranch house with huge windows, a rolling front lawn, and 3 fireplaces. It seemed nice until I felt If's quiet presence over my shoulder. There's a lot of anger out there. I don't see her yet, but this is going to be heavy. Alan parked in the driveway beside the house. I opened the folder and started with the photos. There were first just the trees with no sign of our ghost. I flipped to the second, third, and fourth, still trees. I thumbed through all 14, watching Alan fidget in his seat out of the corner of my eye. I flipped back to the beginning, about to ask if the kid at CVS had played a joke, when a smudge appeared in the third photograph. Just above the falling logs was a gray wisp, which sharpened over the next few pictures. By the 7th one, I had a clear image of her. Half of Jenny Taylor was pretty once. The other half was soaking wet, smashed, and dark. She leaned onto her broken side, her hair hung down from the crushed side of her hair, her mouth twisted in a permanent grimace. She hunched next to the middle log, one hand on the wood, the other balled into a fist. Photo 8 was the same. Photo 9 showed her a bit closer. She was missing a tennis shoe. Photo 10 had her complete clear of the fallen trees, looking directly into the camera with her cold, sad, intact eye. Photo 11 had her halfway across the yard. I turned to Alan. "Didn't you say she stays near the trees?" "She does," he snapped as I looked at the last 3 photos. In the last one, all that showed was what used to be Jenny Taylor's other eye. She doesn't come near the house. That's why we parked the car clear over here. I'm not looking at those pictures, so... oh my God! Lord Jesus! Beside the car, bent at the waist to look into my window, was Jeannie. If recoiled into the back seat, oh, she is mad. Jeannie's good eye was huge, and half her swollen face was pulled into a cruel, delirious smile. Water poured from her open mouth. She tapped on my window, and the radio station turned on. "Stand By Me" poured out of the speakers at a deafening volume, and the locks snicked open. She opened my door and leaned in close to me. I met her vacant, unblinking gaze directly, but the blast of her energy was like someone pressing icy metal to my skin. Once I got out of the car, she was going to make it hard to leave, but I knew I was going to have to get out eventually. Her anger was huge, and beside me, Alan Tan began to cry. If climbed up into the front seat to shield Alan from the strong, horrible cold of Jeannie's wrath. It washed over us in thick, nauseating waves, oily and freezing. At the sight of If, Alan didn't even scream. His mouth fell open in a silent, gaping "oh." He lurched forward and covered his face and sobbed into his hands. Jeannie gestured to her yard. "Won't you come out here and join me for a bit? I just love meeting new people," she said, water splashing down the front of her soaked, bloody sweater. Her voice shocked me. It didn't match her broken, bruised face at all. She sounded like she never died, like she was 22, moving out to the country for the first time from uptown with all the enthusiasm of a newlywed. As angry as she felt, her words sounded normal. The contrast was jarring. "Let him be, Jeannie," I managed. She craned her neck to look at him around me. "Oh, him. I thought we were friends. After all these times, he keeps coming back here, bringing me company. Aren't you going to say hi, Mr. Tan?" "He's wet his pants," said If, as Alan continued to cry. She pushed her disdain outward in a hard, aggressive burst, and for a moment the pressure of Jeannie's rage was lessened. She laughed then, a high, welcoming sound if it was coming from any other source but this battered, smashed face. "Oh, you're not the first second-rate spook to visit me, miss. You want to see what I can do now?" Her lopsided caricature grin widened, and her face changed. She shrank, and her features contorted and swelled, contracted and shifted until she looked to be about 10 years old. Her gruesome injuries looked far worse on such a young face, but when she spoke, I winced. "Do you think I'm pretty?" she asked in a voice that was low, old, and ghostly. "Other people have been here," she warned, "taught me things." She changed her face again, her skin rippling and shrinking until she looked to be about 4 or 5. "I heard you don't like kids," she told me in her old, dead voice. She was right. I don't. It's never a good sign when they know something about you, but there are worse things, and disgusted with myself, I got out of the car. Immediately she swept me into the air in a massive gust of wind, and she brought me down hard onto the trees. I threw my arms out to catch myself, but she threw me around, hitting my shoulders and hip on invisible obstacles, caught a foot and twisted it hard. She finally dropped me down, face first, on the base of the trees nearest to her. My cheek struck a knot in the wood, and when I got up, it was slowly. "That's kind of like how I feel," she told me, clapping her hands and morphing back into her adult self. "But I got hurt worse, see? More blood, and I died." Back in the car, Alan was wailing in big, hiccuping howls. He tried to start the car, so If stalled his engine, and he stomped hard on the gas while pounding the steering wheel in terrified desperation. Jeannie's face twisted into a scowl. "I didn't take you for a coward, Mr. Tan," she sneered coldly. She turned back to me. "Never pick a cowardly, spineless man," she said, holding up her left hand. Her engagement ring glittered merrily there, in bright defiance of her current state. That perked me up. She didn't know I was married. That was good. I cast a look of derision and scorn at Alan Tan's hysterical figure, and watched as If climbed onto the roof of the car, looking concerned. I gave her a subtle thumbs up, wiped some blood off my lip, and said to Jeannie, "All of them are cowards. How about I just stay single for a while and spare myself some heartache?" A host of emotions crossed her face, and she settled on sad. Her good eye sharpened from its maniacal wideness to a thoughtful quiet, and she sat down. I watched her quietly, and in moments her presence changed. Her aggression waned, slowly at first, and then suddenly it was gone. She picked at the leaves on her sweater and ignored me for a little bit. She seemed so human in those few minutes, I didn't want to break the silence, so I waited. "Sorry I dropped you on your face," she said at length. "I'll be okay," I assured her. I studied her face as she kept her eyes down. "You feel like talking, Jeannie?" She winced at her name. "You're going to sit here and talk to me like I'm not dead." I shrugged. "Not your fault." She looked up sharply then, regarding me cautiously with her good eye. "You're not acting like I expected you to." "I got holy water in the car, if it'll make you feel more comfortable," I deadpanned. Shaking her head, she rubbed one arm briskly with her palm, as if to warm it up. "People have tried that. I'm not a demon." "Nope." Reaching down to a pile near me, I selected a leaf and offered it to her. She swept it into the air, where it twirled and spun for a bit before fluttering back down to the ground. She was quiet again, but her silence was feeling a little more companionable. "What are you still doing here, Jeannie?" She grimaced again. "I don't even like it here. I didn't want to come all the way out here. I hate the country. I'm from Boston. Did they tell you that? I met Stephen at Harvard." I shook my head. Nobody had mentioned Harvard. Stephen brought me out here and said I would love it. He said it was what we needed, fresh air and space. What he meant was fresh air and space to cheat on me. Her face hardened at the memory. We came out here to plan our wedding, and I said, I can do this. People are so nice out in the country, and it'll be so romantic, just the two of us. Well, it wasn't romantic, and there was nobody out here to be nice to. It was just me. When Stephen's coworkers would come to the house, which was all the time, they all acted like I wasn't there. The only person who acknowledged me was Michelle. She was my only friend. My friend, she said, making air quotes with her fingers. He would have Michelle cook for everyone because she knew what they liked. When I told him I could learn, he said it was better that she do it because she was from around here and knew Southern cooking. She said she was making it easy on me, and I believed her. So thoughtful of her, right? Jeannie twisted her fingers in her lap. Our first Thanksgiving here was a disaster, so she came to help us get ready for Christmas. We were decorating, and she said, go get us some mistletoe from out back. I'd never even seen the stuff, but I didn't want to look dumb, so I just went. I figured I'd say I didn't see any when I got back. I walked for a good while. She paused. It makes me sick to think about it now. I can only imagine. Pain flashed across her face, and she started to say something else, but changed her mind and went on. When I got back, they didn't hear me come in. They left the door open so that they would hear me come up the stairs, but they were too busy, and they didn't. She was sitting in his lap, and they were all over each other. His hands were roaming. My only friend and my fiancé, tangled up in each other right before Christmas. He broke the embrace to ask her if there was even mistletoe out here, and she said, who knows, not like we need it. They laughed and went right back to it. I didn't say anything to them. I stared and then turned around and walked back down the stairs. I came back here and then I ran, just took off running. How long was it like that? Were they a thing before we met? Was I going to be the cash cow? Stephen didn't even get a chance to touch my money. He never even found out that I caught them, because all my running, I didn't know where I was going. Next thing I knew, I was waking up face down in the river. I guess I hit my head on some rocks, but other than feeling a little weird, I was just soaking wet and so disoriented. I sat here for a minute, then I walked back towards the house. It took me a while. Everything looked so wrong. Nothing was familiar. Eventually, I made it back, and by the time I got here, I was fuming. I was going to tell Stephen the wedding was off, and if he thought I was some stupid city girl who would brush that under the rug, he was wrong. I got here to see these trees, and that was my first sign that something was wrong. All the decorations in the window were different. Someone had painted the deck. What in the world, right? How did they have time for that? I was taking it all in when the back door slid open and a bunch of people poured out of my house, all laughing and singing. I heard Michelle laughing, so I got closer. Someone was calling out for everyone to get closer for a picture, and they said Stephen and Shelley should get in the middle. They were holding hands, hugging and happy. She was wearing a completely different outfit, and she'd colored her hair. I got closer and the picture was taken, and as they came out of their hug, that's when I felt real shocked. Michelle was pregnant, huge round belly out to here. Jeannie gestured with her hands out in front of her. I was so confused at first. I thought, dang, how hard did I hit my head? This is crazy town. I am imagining this. She fell silent with her hands in her lap. I looked back up at If, who was sitting with her elbows on her knees, resting her chin on her sleeves. Her hair fluttered lightly in the wind, the real wind, and she sent slow pulses, encouraging feelings of comfort in our direction. Alan had stopped trying to drive off and had instead curled into a protective ball facing away from us, with his arms wrapped around his head. Jeannie followed my gaze. I haven't met anyone like her before, she commented. Neither have I replied, turning back to her. Although I can't say I've met a lot like you either. What do you mean? Jeannie leaned back and closed her eyes as if waves made their way to us. I watched her seem to inhale it all in, and as battered as her face was, she looked peaceful. Finish telling me about you, and then I'll tell you about you. She opened her eye, and her sadness washed back in. She seemed to fall into herself on the exhale as she went back to her tale. Oh, I hit my head all right. Right after I saw Michelle's belly, someone started to scream. I mean, just shrieking at the top of their lungs. Someone else waved at the Polaroid they'd just taken, yelling, "It's Jeannie! It's Jeannie in the picture! She's in the picture!" They all turned, and I looked down. I was floating 10 feet up at the same level as the deck. They didn't seem to see me standing there, just in their picture. They were passing it around and shouting and carrying on when Michelle fainted, so I went right past them into the house. It was a whole different place, all different decorations. All my stuff was gone. The carpet was new. When I saw the calendar, I felt like I was going to faint myself. It was a different year. It was 1985 when I came out here, and it was Christmas 1990 when I made it back. Then I saw myself in the mirror. My face was so smashed. My hair was stuck to my head. My shoulder was all collapsed in like this, and water was coming from my mouth like drool. I was grotesque. Everybody at the party was clamoring and screaming. Someone was calling 911 for Michelle, but all I wanted to do was to pass out again. I came back out here, and I was going to go back to the river, but I was lost for 5 years. How long was I going to get lost again if I went back out there? 10 years? Forever? So I sat down here and I cried. I realized that I was dead, really dead. Stephen married Michelle, moved her into my house, and I was sitting here, dead, in their yard. Stephen and Michelle never came back. They sent a moving company for their things, and I heard from one of the movers that she'd lost the baby. They said it was my fault. She stopped and looked me in the eye, her fist held tight and defensive in her lap. I never ever meant for that to happen. I wouldn't have wanted that, even if I'd lived. I stayed quiet and just nodded. I wouldn't have come here if I'd known about Michelle. I wasn't stupid. I loved him. I believed that we could make a life out here and be happy little farmers, like he said. If he wanted money, he never brought it up to me. He was successful on his own. But if it wasn't about that, why bring me out here at all? I figured now it had to be that. Why laugh about me like that if he ever actually loved me? What was the point? But the baby. I would have given him all my cash my parents ever had if it meant avoiding this. I wouldn't have killed a baby. But when I heard those men say that, like I was some kind of monster, I just started screaming. I never did anything right out here. but to be blamed for that was too much. All I did was go for a long walk for some damn mistletoe, and when I got back, I was being blamed for killing a baby and ruining their life. How big a leap is that? How is that fair? So I screamed so much these trees all died. I screamed at everybody who came here because they got to leave and I couldn't. I screamed so much nobody ever moved back in, but I couldn't stop. I was stuck here in this yard because I wasn't brave enough to go anywhere else. That's their house. They lived in it longer than I did. They moved on and built a life. They got to get married. I didn't even get that. She pounded her fist on her legs, emphasizing her words. Her shoulders shook visibly. Her chest heaved like she was struggling to catch her breath. I was stuck here, she said after a minute, in this sweatshirt, these pants, this stupid, useless ring that I can't get rid of. She stabbed her hand out in front of her, the diamond ring shining cold and bright on her finger. I can't change, and I don't know how to leave. Where is heaven? Did the baby go to heaven? Why didn't I? Am I buried somewhere? Did Stephen bring Michelle to my funeral? I have no idea. I'm just here. She put her face in her hands, but she didn't cry. I didn't even have words. This was the most the ghost had ever said to me. I popped my thumbs and sat there thinking. Usually by the time someone calls me, the soul has devolved so much it's barely anything conscious. It's usually just energy rolling around wildly trying to cause pain equal to its own. Jeannie had been out here for over 30 years, and she was sitting here on a falling tree, sad about her ex's new wife's miscarriage. Fresh souls aren't even like this. They spend a lot of time in shock. She was so reasonable. I mean, where's heaven? I don't know. I'm not actually Catholic. I just work for them sometimes. I know angels and demons are real. I know souls are real. But heaven, never been. I rubbed my hands over my face for a minute, trying to gather my thoughts. I should have brought a therapist with me or a priest. This was above my pay grade. I took a long, slow breath, and when I looked over at Jeannie, she was looking up at me curiously. Other dead people come through here sometimes, she said, studying me. Oh? People and things, I guess. I don't know what they all are, but sometimes people who have died walk through here and talk to me. That's how I learned about you. Sometimes I can feel things, but not see them. I hope to see my parents for a little while, but I don't think that's how it works. She waited for me to clarify. I've been doing this job for about 10 years, and I'm still not sure how it works, I admitted. There are a lot of things. You're unique so far, and someone who's been through so much, you're still you. You're still present in your own mind. She straightened. Go on. When we die, our souls separate from our bodies. That much I do know. People who come back from being dead for a few minutes are able to do that because their soul has pulled away but not come apart. They detach and kind of shrink when we die in such a way that they can never be put back together. Not really. They don't fit right anymore. Picture trying to put a peel back on a dried orange. You can put a soul back into the body for a little while, but the body won't be alive. It'll just be animated for a little while, and the body will continue to die. Some people can move a soul aside a little bit and take control of the soul's body without killing it. but then it does start to kill it, but that's different. Anyway, the soul cannot exist. Well, it usually can't outside of its intended body and its intended lifetime. It breaks down like our peeled orange. Is this making sense? I asked. I've never tried to explain this before. She nodded. It happens at different rates, but all souls break down. They can't stop existing altogether, but they can rot and become a completely different being than the person they were when they were alive. They usually try to hurt people because they're in so much pain, they try to push it out. Some try to steal bodies, some just cry, some kind of forget they were supposed to move on and they just roam. Some get angry and try to keep things the way they were. I think you experienced this back when people were trying to move these logs. I stopped when I saw her cringe. After a pause, she asked, "Are you going to make me leave?" I shook my head. "Not like you're thinking. I can help you get out of here if you're ready. You really shouldn't stay here, Jeannie. Christmas is coming, and if you stay here, you're just going to keep hurting. I don't think you can hold your soul together forever, no matter how strong you are." She laughed, but this time it was a sad, mirthless laugh. "It's always Christmas here," she said, waving her hand in a wide gesture at the house and yard, "and it always, always hurts." She let her hand fall and turned to look at the woods. "I think I need to go in there," she said. "It's the only place I haven't tried." "I think you're right." We sat together for a few minutes, each in our own thoughts. If watched us intently from her spot on the hood of the car. After a bit, she nodded to me, and I stood up. Jeannie followed my lead, and together we walked towards the forest. While we walked, I took off my glove to feel the air. She watched as I touched a couple of trees, scooped up some handfuls of dirt and leaves. A few rocks I threw out came whistling back until I threw the last one that fell with a soft thud. We headed in the direction, and when I found a spot that felt right, I pointed. "You'll know when you see it," I told her. "Start here." Jeannie held a hand out tentatively, and she smiled. "I feel it," she said. She seemed to forget about me, enraptured by what she felt. She took a slow, deep breath, as if to steady herself, and started walking. Eventually, I lost sight of her among the trees. I waited a few more moments, then left the woods and headed back to the car. If climbed back in through the window. Alan slowly unfolded himself from his crouched position on the seat and wiped his nose with a handkerchief. "Is it over?" he asked haltingly. "It's over," I confirmed. "Jeannie is gone. You can sell the properties if anyone wants them." He straightened in his seat and started the car, staring straight forward. "If you tell anyone about this," he warned me nastily, "I'll sue." His bottom lip quivered as he spoke, somewhat ruining his effort at intimidation. "Sue?" I wondered absently. "Sue whom, exactly? In what court?" If bristled behind us, but I held up a hand and just told him a half-truth. "The Catholic Church has better lawyers than you, Alan," I said placidly. "Would they use them on me? Unlikely. Let's just call this finished." He blanched, and I held out my hand. He fished around in his jacket pocket for the envelope containing my payment. I counted the contents and then pulled a piece of paper from my own pocket. I held up my thumb, and if bit down, Blood wailed, and I spread it around a little before pressing it firmly to the paper. "This is my guarantee," I told him. "If Jeannie were ever to return, which she most definitely will not, you press this with your palm, and I'll know I need to come back. If you ever have another problem like this, you do not press this. You call the same number you called the first time. This is strictly for Jeannie Montgomery Taylor. If you or anyone else should press this for any other reason but her, it will come alone, and you will be very unhappy. Are we clear?" For a minute I thought he was going to tell me to get out, but then he looked in his rearview mirror, and there sat If, her gleaming, sharp, bloody teeth bared in a menacing grin. She waved her tattered sleeve ends at him. He yelped, nodding rapidly, and backed the car out of the driveway. We rode back to Jackson in silence. But now that I've told y'all, I guess I'm getting sued.